Here's a slightly personal statement. I went to a state comprehensive in Bradford, which the BBC once dubbed the worst school in Britain. I'm not bashing the BBC. I think it was true. The only reason I'm sitting here is because of one teacher, the one teacher amongst many at that benighted institution who actually seemed to give a toss. She took us to see Shakespeare, read Wordsworth while walking in the lakes, helped us fall in love with learning and literature. People like her are life-changing. Beryl Pickfance, for that was her name, certainly changed my stars, which is why I'm delighted to introduce you to someone like her, but who has actually gone much, much further. Her Michaela School in London has helped hundreds of poor kids do things that would have been impossible elsewhere. Her unconventional leadership has seen her receive death threats and left enemies likening her to Hitler. But her way of doing things challenges so much of what passes for accepted wisdom in the educational establishment. She is Catherine Birbalsingh, pictured here on the front of last week's Times magazine and described, not for the first time, as Britain's strictest head teacher. And she joins me now, I'm delighted to say. Catherine Birbalsingh, thanks so much for your time, because I know you always have a busy day, so we do appreciate it. If any of my children were to go to the Michaela School, what would they notice that was different maybe from a typical school?
Well, the thing that people talk about most are silent corridors. So the children walk in single file very quickly to their lessons. It takes about a minute and a half. It means everybody turns up on time to the start of the lesson. It means that once the children are working, which is, within 30 seconds of getting into the lesson, you don't have other children turning up 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, 20 minutes late, swinging the door open, bam, and everybody bursts into laughter. That sort of thing that can happen is very disruptive in a school. Sometimes people can get very upset by this idea that there are silent corridors, and they say that silence is oppressive. But I think it's liberating for the children. It means they can get there quickly. When you're trying to catch up a child with his reading age, his chronological reading age, for instance, might be of a 7-year-old, but he is actually 11 years old. You need as much time as possible in the classroom with him to teach him so that he can catch up.
Catherine, if you don't mind, I'm just going to go through a couple of things I've written, half a dozen things I've written down. I want to do it quick fire so you could just help our viewers and listeners build up a picture of how the school is different, how Michaela is different. So where do you stand, for instance, and we'll try and do this quickly, on phones in school?
Yeah, so, well, obviously we don't have phones in school, but we go further than that. We encourage families not to give them smartphones at all. So we have a whole digital detox system. Now, this is up to the children. It's entirely voluntary, where they can give their phones in. I've got this big safe, and after school every day, a teacher's there manning it, so that the children give in their phone, and the brave ones give it in from Monday to Friday. The ones who perhaps are coming up towards the GCSE exams might give it in for 3 months. Others might say, okay, I'm new to this. I'm going to give it in for one night and see if I can get allow myself that freedom from my phone for one evening. Parents absolutely love it because obviously it supports them if they're trying to do that sort of thing. And then those parents who really listen to what we say just don't buy their children a smartphone at all. And we sell brick phones at the school. I actually sell them at a loss, so they cost £14, but I sell them for £10. and that's because I know it's the number one thing that's going to help those children succeed, is getting them off those smartphones. The brick phone still allows you to text your child, you can phone your child, so all of those elements of convenience.
I've tried the brick phones. I've tried the brick phones. John Brazier, if you're listening, there's a safe that's going to be arriving in our house soon. So that's phones. Catherine, uniforms, school uniforms.
Yeah, so we have a school uniform, but we are really strict about the rules. So the thing is, all schools sort of have these rules. They just don't necessarily enforce them. Most schools have a uniform and want the children to have the ties to the top and the shirts tucked in. They just don't necessarily insist on it. We simply insist on it, that's all. And when you insist on it, it means all the children have their shirts tucked in and have their ties to the top. I mean, I have to say, we never have to tell the children to tuck their shirts in and so on, because they just look proud and they're in their uniforms and they walk, with this sense of, I'm a Michaela pupil and isn't it wonderful? And it gives you a real sense of team. When the England football team go out to play, they're all wearing the same shirt and they're a team, they're going to win together. And it's the same with us. We recite poetry together. We sing God Save the Queen together, and we're all wearing the uniform together, and we're going to go out and conquer the world.
But unlike the England football team, they generally don't have to serve detention if they lose a lose a match. What is your detention policy? It's described as quite hard line.
Yeah, so if you were to turn around in the lesson, you'd first get a demerit. That's a sort of warning. And then if you were to do it a second time, you would get a detention. But I have to say that because the culture, what ends up happening is that the culture is such that the standards are so high, everyone gets used to that. So turning around in a lesson is a very rare thing. They just don't do it. And they're so engaged with the lesson and their hands are always going up. That's the other thing. You say, what would they notice first of all if you visited? Well, you'd notice silent corridors. The other thing that guests say is that they can't believe how many children in the lessons are super engaged. Question gets asked and 75% of hands go up and they're all super keen and wanting to answer the questions. And there's a culture of achievement. Sometimes, your listeners will know that there can be a culture, sadly, in classrooms where you're a bit ashamed to be the person who knows the answers. You're ashamed to do well in the tests, and you don't want the other kids to realize that you've actually been working.
Whereas we've got
for school. Culture.
You don't want to be the SWAT.
Exactly. And we've got the opposite culture, which is that everybody's wanting to be at the top and everyone's wanting to do as well as they can. And because so many of them are putting their hands up, if they get something wrong, well, it's fine, because next thing you know, the hand is up again and then they're able to answer another question. There's no shame around getting it wrong or shame around getting it right. Everyone's just trying to learn as much as they can. And that, I think, comes from the excellent discipline that's there. So the teacher is supported in their teaching, so teachers come here and think, isn't it wonderful? I get to really teach and I get to build relationships with my children. And the reason why I'm able to build relationships is because there is a calm there. So I can really show my personality and we can have a bit of a laugh, and that's all really nice because they're safe and secure in that orderly environment. I think people often think, well, order and structure are bad and that being strict is bad. I had a new member of staff who's coming to join us in September. She came here today and she said, well, she asked me, well, what is too strict? And I thought, well, when you're mean. If you're mean, then that is too strict. There's something wrong with that. Tough love is what I like to call it. And when you love your children, you hold your standards high for them. Because if you put your standards there, the children will reach there. If you put them up there, they're going to go there. So you've got to keep pushing them and scaffolding them and helping them. And then eventually when they get to 16, 17, 18, you can say, off you go, little birdie, fly. And then they can do it without you.
Yeah. And I love the fact, and I'm sorry if this is coming across as sycophantic, but I think what you're doing there is fantastic. I'm appalled that you are so frequently denigrated for doing something which is turning around lives which have otherwise really quite limited prospects. But I think some of the stuff you do is really quite daring. I mean, maybe that's the wrong word for what I'm about to describe, but you're quoted as saying, for instance, that you'd rather they listen to Beethoven and Mozart than Stormzy, because actually they can listen, and they will listen to loads of Stormzy out there outside of school. Here is the place where they do the more elevated, rarefied stuff, the soul-nourishing, high culture stuff. And why shouldn't they have high culture?
Well, exactly. And the thing is, too often in education, sadly, I mean, well-meaning people, teachers, think to themselves, because the discipline isn't there, and because they're not well supported by their senior team, they think, well, how can I get the kids engaged? I know what I'll do. I'll make it more relevant to the kids. So rather than teach them Mozart, who's boring and dead and so on, what I'll do is I'll pick Stormzy or something like that, and we'll do this instead because that's fun and it's what they know, and that way they'll be engaged. But what I would say is that if you get the discipline right in the first instance, then you're able to take them to worlds they would never otherwise have known. And that's the whole point of teaching, because I'm not saying Stormzy is bad or that you don't want to get them to read a variety of different literature and so on, but would they read Shakespeare on their own? No. So it's for us to make it accessible. And for that, you need a calm environment. And once you've got that as a teacher, you can then get them genuinely interested in the actual stuff, as opposed to thinking I've got to trick them. I want them to learn French, so let's do a French rap. Or I want them to write an essay in English, so I'm going to get them to write an essay about what they think about their school uniform, as opposed to I'm going to get them to write an essay about Macbeth. Do you see?
Yeah, no, I see it. Catherine, why has there been so much animus heaped at your door. You look at the results, your school's got fantastic results. You know, that's the only metric that should matter. And yet, as I mentioned in my introduction, you've been likened to Hitler, a Nazi, you've had death threats. Do I call it right when I say actually what you are is a threat to what Michael Gove, when he was Education Secretary, used to call the blob?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think that what I found, look, we get over 600 visitors here a year, and most of those are teachers. So, you know, there are lots of teachers out there who are really interested in learning from us. I hear from them often. Classroom teachers who write to me saying, oh, I've learned so much from the things you tweet or from my visit to Michaela, and now I'm doing that in my own classroom and things are so much better. So there are lots of teachers who are, you know, on our side. But there are, and I'd say they're a significant minority. They're not, you know, they're not majority by any stretch of the imagination, but they're very loud. And the minority are ideologues, is what I'd say. And they, rather than think, oh, well, that's interesting, that school's doing interesting things, maybe I could learn something, they're so convinced of their own methods that they won't question it and they won't change their minds. And I always think to myself, you know, these people always go on about critical thinking. Well, I wish they'd apply some critical thinking to themselves, you know, and use it and just question what they assume is right, even though it's perhaps not working. That's all. And that's what I did, because I used to be a progressive teacher. I used to think all the same things as my detractors think right now.
Was there a moment, Catherine Birbalsingh, was there a moment when you thought, holy smoke, this isn't working, something else needs to work here? Was there a moment?
No, it wasn't a moment. It was over years. What would happen is, you know, when you're on your PGCE or when you're being taught at school, there's some speaker who comes in and tells you to try out various activities. You try them out, and then you think, well, you know what? The more traditional activities are actually much more successful. So I'm going to stick with these. and oh yeah, they tell me that actually you don't want to have silence, but you know what? When they're silent and working, they're actually getting a lot of work done. I quite like this. So it was just over years that I came to realize that what worked and what didn't work. But you've got to be open-minded enough to try different things out. And that's why I changed my mind. And certainly in the establishment of Michaela, just in the last few years, for that matter, I've developed my thinking in so many different ways of what works and what doesn't work. Because we've just got a wonderful example here of a place where loads of learning can take place. And I'm always saying, you know, go on our website, you can book in for lunch with the children. Colin, you must come and have lunch with the children and have a tour, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
I've had my last school lunch. I don't propose to have any more. Catherine, it seems to me that all that will make loads of sense to loads of people. What you've also done is you have inserted yourself, I think, quite forcefully and, you know, in a way that's very compelling into this culture wars more broadly. I mean, for instance, you're on Twitter a lot. You've written 3 books, I think I'm right in saying. You said recently, quote, black children underachieve because of what the well-meaning liberal does to them. I mean, so you're not just, you know, you're saying things that address some of the really big questions around identity politics, around race, you know, fan of Black Lives Matter. You didn't need to pick those fights, but you did.
Yeah, that's also probably why they don't like me. Yes, I am a bit outspoken about those things, and that's because I think those things hurt my children. So, and I'm very passionate about our children and wanting them to do well, and children across the country. And I don't think it's helpful to tell children, whatever they are, whether they're black or poor or they live in a council estate or they have a single mom or whatever it is, if you're constantly telling them that the world is against them and constantly saying that, you know, this establishment hates them and there's going to be so many difficulties for them and so many obstacles, the child will give up. And the child will not be able to bond with their teachers and with potential, you know, employers later and so on. There needs to be a certain amount of trust there. And so while I'm not someone who would deny that there's such a thing as racism or classism and so on, I just don't think it's helpful to constantly bombard the children with that. So instead, what we do is we're regularly encouraging them to work hard and to set themselves that self-discipline and the ambition to go after what they want. And that, yes, there are obstacles out there, but you're going to leap over them. and nobody's going to stop you because you've got this, and you've got this because you've got the knowledge, you've got the skills, and you're going to go out there and get what you want, you know, as opposed to kind of lamenting the fact that life is so difficult for certain groups of people.
Yeah. Catherine, Lynn May's been alongside me throughout the last couple of hours, and I know she's nodding vigorously. I may have a question or two for you. She left school more recently than I did.
Yeah, we've spoken before, and I just wanted to say I love what you're doing, and I wholeheartedly agree that it's important to teach, you know, the impact of racism. It's important to understand it's there. However, I think a lot of groups have got to a space where it's become a handicap. And if you make the colour of your skin a handicap, you will not see beyond that when you look in the mirror. And I don't know if you feel the same, but I'm so confused, especially when people from ethnic minorities criticise you so much, because I was born in Barbados, my father was born in Barbados, and I went to a faith school which was Caribbean and African faith school. And the discipline in there was phenomenal, and it's likened to what you do in your school. And there was, you know, silence, and even to the point of the cane, which was stopped. However, the level of discipline was reflective in the grades that we got at that school. And it was only when local authority said you can't instill that, you know, discipline, is when the grades started to plummet. So it's, if anyone questions you, you can see the results, and people should be based on the results that it works.
Yeah, but I have to say, I find that the ethnic minorities who I speak to are very supportive. The ones who might not be are the ones who have never met me, who've never spoken to me, who've never seen the school. The ones who I talk to, they get it. And that's because I would actually argue that lots of ethnic minorities are small c conservatives. And I know that we tend to vote to the left, but I actually think we are small c conservatives. And when I say that, what I mean is we believe in a sense of personal responsibility, a sense of duty towards others, a sense of community. We believe in being fair, being the idea of having ambition and going after it and working hard. So, yeah, I find when I speak to people and explain my ideas and what we do here, that, you know, they are in entire agreement. The people who I find are most
adopted in other schools?
Disagree with me are sort of white middle classes, especially the ones who've been educated at private schools, who have absolutely no idea what the state sector is like, have never visited the inner city, don't know my kinds of kids, and so they just have no idea what they're talking about.
I'm just going to show Lynn how you actually interrupt somebody. This is how you do it. They pull the microphone up. That's the way it works. Catherine, I'm just... You've got a big say now when it comes to government thinking on social mobility. I mean, I know a lot of people hear that phrase, social mobility, they switch off, oh, how dull. I'm very interested in it. I mentioned in my introduction there, I went to a lousy school. Really was a lousy school. I'm not making more of it than I ought to. It wasn't a great school in Bradford. There were some teachers who tried very hard, but it was before there was a sort of revolution in this thinking to some degree. It was anyway. Look, that's another story. But when it comes to social mobility, what's the one thing that you would urge the government to do to make your kind of social mobility something which works for more people?
Well, my key thing is culture, and what successive governments never talk about is the power of the family, and what family can do behind the scenes. Now, the three things that I want to concentrate on, which is the family, schools, education, and then routes into the workplace later. But to begin with, schools don't meet children until 3, 4, sometimes 5 years old. And those first few years are crucial. By the time they reach age 3, the divide that happens between the disadvantage and the advantage is massive. And schools can never catch that up. And that comes from how much do those families read to their children? How much do they talk to their children? And I think a lot of disadvantaged families don't do that stuff because they just don't know that they ought to. And I wish we could put some money into campaigns. In the same way as we have, we all know we're meant to eat 5 vegetables and fruits a day. Now, we might not do it, but we know that we ought to because there's been campaigns around that. Well, if we had similar campaigns, everybody would know to talk to their child. I mean, if you think about it, it's a bit of an odd thing talking to a toddler because they don't respond. So why would you talk to them? You might not realize as the parent that it's when you're speaking that the child is then developing their language. And it's so important to talk all the time, more so than you would talk to adults. So that is the sort of thing that I would love to see politicians just admit for once the power of the family and then try to help families and support them in being better for their children.
Yeah. Catherine, we've got about a minute left, a minute and a half left or thereabouts. I read there are parents beating a path to your door. You're running a free school. Again, there'll be people scratching their heads, free school, what's a free school? I've got a 16-year-old who'll be going to a free school from September. I like the idea. Tell me I've made the right choice.
Well, to be honest, it depends on the head teacher. It depends. How strict are they? Are their standards high? Do they love the kids, And if all those things are true, then you've made the right choice.
Well, I'm in the business of getting my choices validated, and nobody better to do it than you. Catherine Birbalsingh, what a pleasure to have you on, and congratulations with all the work you're doing at the Michaela School. It's an example that ought to be more widely followed. There you go, there's a strong opinion, and I'm very happy to support it. Our thanks to Catherine Birbalsingh. Just a final thought to say thank you to Lynn May. She's an inspirational leader, isn't she?
I agree with everything that she's doing, and I don't understand why she's getting the backlash. I just hope that, education, the government can look at what she's doing, see the results and try and adopt this in our educational system.